contribution each of us has to make to a district a better place to work and live. Strive to keep the decision-making process open, accessible, participatory, understandable, timely, just, and fair. Avoid and discourage conduct which is not in the best interest of the district, and treat people with whom I come in contact with while performing my duties with respect. Commit to continued work towards First Nations reconciliation. You so affirm and you have read and understand the district's code of conduct?
I do so affirm.
Excellent. Yes. No, well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's it. I don't know. Right on.
Thank you, Staff Sergeant Bradley, and congratulations to Councillor Lauren Greenlaw. Thank you. Moving on to section 4 in our agenda. Item 1, the 2023 to 2027 financial plan, tying it all together. And I see Ms. Boxford is going to be starting us off here, I believe, so I will turn it over to you. And before I do that, I just wanted to remind those watching and those around the council table that the budget that we're about to be brought through in this process is a product of a process that started budget process is always sort of ongoing, but really started substantively in and formally in May, and is the result of the previous mayor and council's strategic plan and direction. So our ability to affect this is limited, and our role here is to sort of shepherd this through the final portions of the process and have it adopted prior to the end of the year. And that's the lens in which we'll be looking through it. And at the end of our term, the next mayor and council will need to do the same with our final budget as well. So that's frames where we are, and I'll let staff take us through the presentation, and then we'll have lots of opportunities for questions throughout. And immediately following this, we're moving into there will be a section around public participation, question and answer opportunity as well. And we roughly expect the first part to be take about an hour and a half, and then we'll have a half hour at the end for the public portion as well. And yeah, I'll have more to say about that, but I'll save that till we switch modes there. So over to you, Ms. Boxford.
Thank you, Mayor Hereford. Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, and members of the community. My name is Heather Boxford, General Manager of Financial Services here at the District of Squamish. And joining us today is Mr. Russell, Senior Financial Analyst, who will walk us through the Tying It All Together package, which is the results of the budget deliberations from previous months. We also have several district budget managers in council chambers as well as online who can assist with any questions or discussion on their budgets and projects. So before we get started, I wanted to provide a brief introduction to today's workshop, Tying It All Together. So as the name implies, council and members of the public now we have had several workshops on different elements of the budget, including robust discussion with council, and received some valuable feedback along the way. And today is the day that staff and council will be tying it all together. And we look forward to your questions and comments. As Mayor Hereford had mentioned, as a matter of process, this is work from the previous council. And when this budget process is completed, council will be straight into strategic planning for the new council's strategic plan in December, which will then form the 2024 to 2028 financial plan. In terms of today, given we have a few new members of council, Mr. Russell will provide a brief summary from each workshop to date, and then we'll turn the focus over to just the changes that have been made throughout the budget process. Finally, we will be opening up to discussion to the public online, or if anyone's in council chambers. Also, council, a reminder that this is the last kick of the can before we move into our public engagement event. We look forward to our formal public engagement event on November 29th at Brennan Park Recreation. And of course, we also encourage the public to continue to engage with us via email and on Let's Talk Squamish. And so before I turn it over to Mr. Russell, I do want to thank Mr. Russell, council, and our budget managers for working incredibly hard and diligently over the last several months to get the budget to where it's at. And with all things considered moving forward, the district will be celebrating the second year in a row of achieving our goal of finalizing the budget by the end of the fiscal. So with that, I'll hand it over to Mr. Russell.
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of council, members of the public. Thank you very much, Ms. Boxford, for that wonderful introduction. And we will start. Our objective today is to, let me rephrase that. This is our recommendation for our report. And this is the resolution that we would like to have council pass. So our intent is to have you approve the information that will be presented at the upcoming public event on in 2 weeks, on November 29th. We have a timeline, and this starts at the start. So way back in June, we spoke about capital, and now we are at the November date of November 15th, where we are tying it all together. And you can see that we have a couple more steps to take here, and our goal would be adoption in mid to late December. So I will begin with an outline of the changes that we've made with respect to the general fund, and again I will continue on from here. So within the general fund, within the grouping that we classify as non-discretionary, there are 3 elements. So we have inflationary non-discretionary, growth related, and capital construction, and I'll touch on each of those briefly and provide you with some additional information. I should, just to let you know, council, if it is your desire, we can make this slide deck available to you if that will be of benefit. With respect to the inflationary items, we have these items that we specifically identified as non-discretionary inflationary items. And when we refer to non-discretionary, we're referring to items that are generally the result of contracts that have already been signed. And so, we've already committed to, doing our fleet maintenance. And so we recognize that with inflation and the increase in prices of gas, increase of prices of parts that we have to buy, that our overall cost for that service will increase. The significant portion of our inflationary non-discretionary commitment in 2023 is related to personnel. We had 4 major contracts that settled last year, and as you can see, varying amounts and dollar amounts included here, but the total of our labor changes year over year is well over $1 million. So that's one of the key drivers. It's rather unprecedented that you have this many contracts all coming due at the same time. Normally, we would not plan it that way. And to be fair, I think we had staggered ours, but the RCMP contract is totally outside of our control, and that was settled late last year. With respect to growth, there are 2 general terms or areas for which growth-related non-discretionary costs come into play. And again, as I had said previously, when we refer to non-discretionary, these are the items that management can shuffle a little bit. They have a little bit of wiggle room, but generally not a great deal. They're, for the most part, driven by prearranged contracts, etc. So the first one is annualization of prior year's service level changes. So when we have a service level change, which often relates to increases in personnel, when we're looking at personnel, we recognize that there's a hiring cycle and you won't be able to hire everyone on January 1st because the budget just got approved in December. So there's going to be a lag. So we would stagger the time that we've included those additional positions within the budget year. As a result of that, the following budget year, there will be an increase related to the remainder of those annual salaries for that staff, if it is specifically staff related. So in 2023, we're seeing a $800,000 increase related to decisions that were made in the 2021 budget. In addition to that, we have a one-time adjustment related to prior year's tax stabilization, and that's really, as much as anything else, it's a methodology change from year to year. And so we've had to increase the overall tax component by $700,000. On the miscellaneous, this is where we get into other changes, revenues and contract adjustments that we have with other groups. So for example, we have a standing agreement with the library. So library has increased their requirements, and so that's putting pressure on our budget. There's a number of other items in there. You'll see that we have one of the other significant items is IT licensing. As we've progressed through our plans to roll out better and more effective technology platforms, the cost of operating those technology platforms also increases. So that's another factor. One of the things that we saw year to year is we had a dramatic increase in building permit revenue year over year. And so we were able to increase the revenue budget for building permits by $500,000. So that absorbed a lot of the impacts that you see for these other non-discretionary price increases. So that's kind of helped us out this year. And the third item that we'd like to speak to with respect to non-discretionary costs or capital construction costs. So we have a debt program, which is built up to encapsulate 2 or 3 specific areas. So existing debt, once it's paid off, it falls off. And so what we're seeing is that we had a significant portion of existing debt come due in 2021, and payments were no longer required as of 2022. And that a significant portion of that 266 that you see there is directly related to the RCMP building. The debt associated with that expired last year, or I don't know if that's the exact term, but we finished making our payments, let's say. So then we differentiate the other 2 increases in new debt costs between infrastructure, which relates to in-ground assets and additions, which is generally going to be related to things like diking, road building, etc., and debt servicing related to facilities. And in this instance, the major cost increase that we're looking at was the first of our major facilities that's come on stream is Valley Cliff Fire Hall, and that is increasing our debt servicing cost by $500,000. So then we have projects, and when you look at the various projects, this is a quick analysis of the change in project funding for special operating projects year to year. And what we're showing here is that we've had a slight decrease of roughly $30,000 year over year on special operating projects. With respect to the tax support for capital projects, it was preset at $1.5 million. That's equivalent to the value that was in the previous year's budget. And we've made a transition from financing capital projects by direct tax support. And now what we're doing is we're transferring all the funds to our reserves, and then we fund it directly from the reserves. It's a more sustainable methodology, and it dovetails much better with our asset management philosophy. So at this point, I'm going to speak about service level changes, and I'm looking at my notes and I've skipped over a page. So
Mr. Russell, I'm just, we didn't discuss in advance where the opportunity for the questions are. So I'll take this opportunity to ask that question. And where would you like, is there a natural break, or
Yeah.
are we going sort of ongoing throughout?
there is a natural break in 2 slides.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll just get to that point. As I flipped over an extra page and I went, oh, I missed my natural break. So service level changes. Service level changes relate to areas where we're increasing services or we're providing additional services. In some instances, we're providing additional services, but we have funding for those additional services, either externally or internally from charges to capital. And so therefore, they may have a net zero tax impact. In this instance, what we're looking at is we have 3 items that have a tax impact in 2023. The largest one is the additional strength within the fire department. Again, that's also related directly to the fire department's new contract. And in addition to that, we have transit expansion. In 2022, the district and BC Transit agreed to an expansion, but due to COVID and sort of COVID overhang, it wasn't appropriate for BC Transit to expand services in 2021. So they've delayed that expansion by a year, and now that expansion is going to take place in 2022. It has been pushed, I should say, to 2023 from 2022. So there's a delay. And the last one is we wanted to put some money into corporate training initiatives. As I had spoken earlier, that often there are impacts of future year impacts of service level changes. There are 2 other service level changes that you're not seeing here because they do not have a direct tax impact in 2023. One is for increases in RCMP personnel, and that does not have a direct increase in impact in 2023 because it is being financed through reserve or provision draw. And the other element is increase in staffing for parks. And that is a direct result of new parks coming on stream, which our information shows that will be much later in the year in 2023 than we had earlier anticipated. And so that's been pushed to 2024. And those 2 new parks would be Waterfront and Oceanfront. I think that's the right names. So as a result of that, we're looking at a really substantial service level change impact in 2024, like almost $1 million. So last slide before our stop here is this is an update. This just shows a comparison year over year of what the tax impacts are. So we want to emphasize that in 2023, we're looking at a tax impact of 5.7%, which sounds like 5.9%, which sounds like a really high number. But we should remind people that on an average residential property, that equals $139. So it sounds like a really big number when you say 5.9%, but when you think about it in dollar terms, it's, $10, $11, $12 a month. It's not quite so substantial when you look at it from that perspective. And with that, we come to the place where we have a natural break. And since Mayor Herford, you've already asked us to make a stop here, I will do that and allow for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Russell. Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. One of the things that jumped out in me in the package was this wording: additional work on the public works site, removal of animal control building and relocation of the salt sheds have been postponed to better coordinate with timing delays in building the new public works facility. I was certain the salt sheds have already been moved. Are we moving them again, or is this work that's already been done but will be paid for in the next budget cycle? I'm hoping we can get some clarity on that.
I can offer some clarity. You are correct. The salt sheds that were on site have been relocated. There was some slight confusion in putting the document together, and there was another project that was being requested by Public Works, which involved development of new salt sheds. And unfortunately, we thought that was the same thing. So those have been delayed. Okay, so there was an understanding that the two salt sheds were the same thing, but they weren't. We realized that later, but they were still delayed. Public Works is okay with that delay. So they have been put off, the new salt sheds. The existing salt sheds have been moved as part of the existing work being done on the Public Works site. So although it sounds misleading, it is in fact correct, even though the salt sheds have been moved.
Great. Thanks for that clarification. And I was also wondering about the steep slope work that's identified in the budget and sources of funding around that. Because it's my understanding that the owners of District Lot 509, 510 have in the past contributed funds to steep slope research work. So I'm curious to know, did the owners of DL 509, 510 in fact contribute? Has that money already been spent, or is it yet to be spent? And maybe just some clarity around that.
I would ask if Mr. Mr. Valanis. Sorry, I was going to say Jonas Valaniskas was available, and he might be able to provide an answer for that.
Thank you, through you, Chair. So in the past, we've had an agreement with the property owner of District Lot 509, 510 to fund this work. The money never materialized, and we never really finished working on the agreement to secure that funding. The 2023 budget shows it as grant funded, so this project would have to be either grant funded, and from time to time there are grants available, or funded by a sponsor. But I think it's too early to say whether that would be a specific property owner or not.
Okay, thank you. One more?
Go ahead.
Okay, the tennis court rehabilitation and additional 2 courts at Brennan Park. Has there been any discussion
Councillor
with...
French, we're going to get through we're just trying to hold the questions to the bit that was shown to us. We kind of wandered into maybe into the future. So hopefully those questions will be addressed in the presentation. And if not, there'll be a time to get that bit.
I'll hold.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have questions at this juncture, and we can move on to the next chapter? Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you. Through the mayor, we'll continue on. The next section in our report relates to special operating projects. And so we'll give you some highlights of special operating projects. And again, at the end of this section, we'll have a slight pause for additional questions. So onward. Here's some highlights of news additions for special operating projects. Agri-foods, environmental restoration, home energy retrofits. And each of these projects is designed to meet a specific need of the community and also to meet specific goals within council's strategic plan. So that's why we're highlighting these specific projects, because there is a demand within the community to address these issues, and there's also a desire within council to meet these areas as they were identified as strategic goals. Further on that, I wanted to highlight some specific projects where we saw changes over the existing special operating project plan, which from the 2022 budget to the 2023 budget or plan. The community support for policing, the original one that was in 2022 included additional RCMP officers. The additional RCMP officers have now been included as service level change, which we highlighted earlier. The multimodal transportation plan, I should have taken this one off the list because it'll get me into trouble yet again, I'm sure. So we did change the commentary, and this is now to manage a increase in costs as opposed to a change in scope. The scope has remained the same. The costs have gone up, inflationary pressures, etc. And lastly, government road realignment pre-design. There are some slight changes in project timing and emphasis, and we have managers in place and online and available to address any of these questions that might be directed with respect to these projects, as Mr. Valaniskas had done previously. We have a number of climate adaptation projects, some of which are listed here. And we wanted to highlight some overall longer term things. So this is to provide council with a better understanding of the long-term nature of this and look at the overall picture. So over a 5-year time frame, we're looking at about $6.5 million. Of that, just over 20% is funded through taxes. In the current year, we're looking at $2.8 million, and of that, just under 10% is funded through taxes. And in the current year, we're seeing, I should say in both terms, we're seeing significant amounts of our operating projects are funded through external support or grants. So we do a lot of work. We use some reserves, no question. We use some tax support, but we are relying significantly upon external funding sources and also upon grants from other levels of government to allow us to manage these projects and finance them. And at this point, we have a pause for questions with respect to special operating projects, and I will pause here, turn it back to Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Council, questions on what we've heard so far? Go ahead, Councillor Pettingill.
Yes, thanks. Just on the RCMP and the movement around, just like to clarify. So if I understand it, then we have about $200,000 going to 1 or 2 general duty members, and that's for general community policing. Is the EAO line item, which was directed to wood fiber demand, if it's required, if they provide the funding, that piece is staying the same? What is sort of different or new is the $200,000 from taxation for general duty members, not specific to any project. Am I understanding that correctly?
Through the mayor, the portions that will be funded by WLNG are related to capital improvements that the RCMP have requested. That would be what we would fund this year. That's the special operating project. The portion in the service level change, there are 2 commitments. We're looking at an increase of 2 RCMP this year. One would be funded through the protective services provision. So the district would fund one through the protective services provision. The second RCMP would be funded through a revenue stream that will be provided by external sources. So let's just put a word to that. Let's say the combination of Fortis WLNG. We would anticipate that they would provide funding for 1 additional RCMP, and we would provide funding for the other RCMP. In 2023, there wouldn't be a direct tax impact for either of those additional RCMP, but there would be additional tax impacts in future years because we're continuing to add RCMP as we move forward.
And I'll just add to Mr. Russell's overview there. So the 220,000 that's being requested for next year, as he explained, would be smoothed in with the protective services provision. This is related to the RCMP's resource request for regular day-to-day policing for the community. So Inspector Dijkstra's original request was for 7 members. This would be looking at adding 1 additional member for next year. Which we thought was prudent given our current financial climb, and then looking at adding additional members as we proceed through the financial plan over the next 5 years.
Thank you. Anything further, Councillor Pettingill?
Not at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Yes, I'd like to ask a question regarding the government road realignment pre-design. And it's really a question to staff as to whether the project description might be reconsidered in a certain element. I'll just quote from it. The current alignment of government road encroaches onto the CHM reserve as a result of decisions made a decade ago. And my question is, perhaps it might be a consideration to clarify that those decisions made decades ago were not by our local government, but by the province of BC, as it was a provincial highway and long before a local government existed here in the valley, just so that the public there may be some risk of misleading the public as to the circumstances.
Through the mayor, I can address that comment.
Yes, go ahead. And please just introduce yourself, as I'm not sure if your video appears on our stream and so on.
Okay, thank you. My name is David Rolston. I'm the manager of municipal infrastructure with the District of Squamish. And I agree with that comment. That's an accurate statement. And yes, that decision was made well in advance of the district owning that road. And so we can certainly change that project description.
Thank you, Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Thank you for the question and the clarity. Anyone else at this point before we move on to the next piece? Okay, back to you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you very much, Mayor Herford, and we will continue along and discuss capital plan highlights. So over the next 5 years, this slide highlights some of the significant capital fund projects that we're looking at. And I can give a little bit of tidbit around why each of these is somewhat significant. In 23, we're adding playgrounds, tennis courts, perhaps splash park to Brenham Park. And the significance of this is that these items are being funded through community amenities contributions. In 2024, we've received a significant grant, and this is the second grant that we were applying for. We don't know whether we have this one yet, but that would allow us to expend another $16 million at Brenham Park, which would substantially increase its sorry, let me rephrase that, substantially reduce its carbon footprint. So I was going to say increase its reduction in carbon intensity, however you want to word that. I know it's kind of going around in a circle. My apologies. In 2025, we're looking at some significant stormwater management system upgrades. In 2026, we're looking at the potential time frame for new landfill site expansion. And then if in 2026 we were to open a new landfill in the following year, we would be spending money to close the existing site. So those are some of the major projects, and we wanted to highlight that because it gives council and the community an opportunity to see the breadth of the different projects that we're taking on and where some of the dollars are being spent over the next 5 years. So this is to highlight some of the new capital additions, and this is the list of projects that we've identified at generally in parks, often at Brennan Park, and these are being funded by CACs. And we had not historically used CACs to the same level as we have this year, 2023, for financing of capital projects. We're looking at significant changes to existing capital projects. And we should reiterate, in addition to this list of projects that are being, or the timing's being changed or costs have escalated, etc., there's a long list of things that our staff has undertaken and done, which might actually be on my next slide. So I'm going to jump over this one. So these are some of the things that we've done to try to better align our cost to our ability to complete the work, better align our costs to what we can afford, and ensure that we are getting the best bang for the buck. So a number of different things, related to delays of some projects, to ensuring that projects are being coordinated across different departments and different facility uses, all in an attempt to manage as best as possible our total capital spend and get as much done with the amount of funding and the amount of capacity that we can, over next year and also over the next 5 years. So with that, we want to highlight an overall picture, a longer term picture of what the total funding and what our total capital plan looks like. So over the next 5 years, we have almost $250 million worth of capital projects identified. So that's a lot of stuff for this community, or for any other community for that matter. And a significant chunk of that is actually getting going right now in the next year or next 2 years. You can also see a breakdown of the overall financing sources. And so we like to point out that it's not an exact an amount, but we put up about a third from our reserves. We get about a third, slightly higher than that, from debenture borrowing. And the other third, give or take, is provided by through grants or development charges of one variety or another. So there's a number of sources that we use to allow us to manage a capital plan of this magnitude. But with that, there's also some costs associated with that. So as you can see, taking on $90 million worth of debt is not going to be free. So there's going to be some dollars required both on the utility side and on the tax side to support that. And at this point, we're going to take a brief pause and turn it back to council. Mayor Herford for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Back to Councillor French. Thank you.
Yes, and this one in the correct category now. Tennis court rehabilitation and the 2 additional courts at Brennan Park. Has there been any discussion with the community groups? I believe this would include the Scouts and the Lions Club. Those groups, maybe others, will be forced to move their stuff from the location where they're currently located. So is there a plan in place for where those folks will move their CCANs once these 2 courts are built?
Sorry, 1 second as we get your mic there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Devin Guest, and I am the Assistant Director of Recreation and Culture here at the District of Squamish. Staff anticipate coming back to Council in later January to discuss the fulsome approach of tennis/pickleball options for Brennan Park fields and lands.
Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on, I have Councillor Pettingill, followed by Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thanks. Two things. Start with a comment, and there was a note about turf field replacement and analysis that council had asked for, cost analysis. And I just wanted to clarify because it wasn't clear to me from the description that my intent or what I was hoping to understand was not so much a justification for the current cost, but as we move forward, and maybe it's more appropriate to come back when we talk about the next sort of field, but understanding the sort of life cycle cost differences between a grass field versus a turf field. And also, if we do one versus the other, does that preclude or enable festivals versus this sport versus that sport? So just sort of, I guess, a note that as thinking forward to future field decisions, that we have the appropriate information to make those decisions. So yeah, I'll leave that comment. The question, and I hope it's appropriate now, it's with the fleet costs, which are reserve continuity things, but under capital. So I think this is the time to ask that. Just wanted to be clear because the fleet items are very specific to very specific vehicles, and some of them are, in the financial plan a few years out. Does staff have the flexibility to adjust and purchase a similar vehicle? And this is sort of a general idea, or are we sort of locking people into those specific vehicles at this point?
Good afternoon. I'm James Story, your Director of Public Works. Through the chair, we do have flexibility in looking at new technology, new types of vehicles, things that are suitable that may come up or change. So certainly we have that flexibility. Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill, is that satisfying? Okay. Moving on, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, just some questions on the No Name Road park development and also perhaps with respect to the Brennan Park Playground and Splash Park. And I just want to make sure that staff are considering the accessibility as we develop those parks and if there's any consideration making them fully accessible playgrounds or what that looks like typically we don't see those designs come back to council and I don't want to design them, but I want to make sure that we're considering an accessibility lens for those playgrounds.
So through the chair, Gary Buxton, General Manager here at the district. We're not at that level of design yet. So yes, and I think particularly with the accessibility committee rolling up, that will certainly be at the forefront of our consideration of design on that.
That's great to hear. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll use this opportunity to ask a couple of questions myself. The item around campground closure, I was curious because the campground was operational this year for events, from my understanding. I saw it activated for a few events, and I just wondered if you could speak more about that particular item. I don't know if we're just projecting a reduction or if we're talking about not operating the campground in any fashion this year.
Was Francis on the line?
Hello? Yeah. True council. Through the chair, sorry. Francis Lepage, General Manager, Community Services. So the plan for the campground is we are changing the model to really host tournaments and events or rent the campground for events. And this will all be moving under the master plan guidance. So we're working on this transition at this time. So this is why there's no plan on reopening the campground for now.
Okay, thank you. The next one, I was curious. There was an item in there around the confluence of the Chikai and the Cheakamus and the maintenance of that. And I was curious. I think it's in the second year, so 2024, if I remember correctly. I'm just curious about the scheduled frequency of that. I saw it in there as a one time, and I know that there's been some emergency work done there in the past, and I was just curious to understand how we establish what's appropriate for that particular project, given that it's ongoing all the time.
Through the chair, I would ask David Rolston if he could address that, please.
Through the mayor, yes, that's a good question. And ultimately, the amount of debris that is deposited near the confluence of the Chikai and Cheakamus is unpredictable. There could be several years where there's minimal deposition within that zone, but then a single storm could come and deposit a significant quantity. So it's very difficult to establish sort of a regular budget, say we're contributing $100,000 or $200,000 every 3 years or something regular. Unfortunately, just due to the nature of debris flows, it does need to be somewhat reactive based on just observations and what's actually happening within the river.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, Mr. Russell, you mentioned there was a new approach to the CACs and where staff felt it was appropriate to use those. Could you give us a high level sort of thought into what that change was?
Excuse me, through the mayor, for members of council and the public, if you were to go back over the years that I've been here, which is 4, we were not using CAC reserves to fund capital projects at all when I got here in 2019. We were contemplating the use of this for some minor adjustments, but it was very restricted. As we saw the growth in the value and the volume of CACs, it became apparent that this was going to become another more significant funding source on a longer term basis. So there were discussions held internally with district staff about the types of things that we thought would be appropriate to use this funding for. So when we looked at the capital plan presented for 23 through 27, we noted that there was a number of projects, a number of recreation projects being identified early in the plan, and that we had sufficient CAC reserves built up at that point in time that we would be able to cover the cost of those items. We also looked at that in comparison to the other areas where we could find additional funding, which, for example, would be capital reserve or use of debt. And it was determined at this point in time that development seemed to be progressing at a level that we could make that shift. And then so as a result, we are putting forward this plan where this is the first year where we've are showing a significant use of CAC contributions, taking them back out of the reserve and applying them against actual specific capital projects. And we hope to develop a more robust, let's say, I think it would be a reasonable term, policy framework around that would allow us to both capture the amount of value that we're going to get in, the number of dollars we would be receiving from developers for CACs, but also to structure where we would use CACs and how those funds could be deployed for the betterment of the community. and we will bring both of those plans back to council, I believe in 2023, for council's review. So this was an opportunity for us to kind of open the door and move down a path that we hadn't used before. We think that it was necessary because, to be fair, there aren't that many options to fund tax-supported projects outside of the capital reserve. So this was one that we thought it was time that we investigated further usage.
Thank you, and appreciate that clarity. And when I was looking at this, the in the 5-year financial, there's the overall number of CACs, that the dollar value that we're projecting there. I was curious, with the lack of a robust policy around this, what sort of interim philosophy were you using, and does that represent the vast majority of the CACs projected to be collected over that time, or does this leave a certain percentage held back, knowing that it's variable and depends on external factors, but just in your projections thus far, what were you using roughly for that piece of the work?
Well, looking back historically, we're seeing a pattern of CAC reserve contributions of a pattern of the sustainable contributions of over $1 million a year. So they obviously fluctuate year to year, but we feel that we're probably going to see something in the neighborhood of $1 million per year. So right now we're looking at $4 or $5 million in the pot today. I think it might be slightly higher than that by the time we get to year end. So what we're talking about right now is some use for the Valley Cliff Fire Hall, potentially $1 million, and then $4 million for that list of projects that we've shown over the next couple of years, primarily in parks. So that would use up most of what is there today, but we're anticipating growth of about $1 million a year. And so what we're anticipating is that in 25 or 26, we would have another $3 to $4 million available, and that will be used to backstop the grant that we're applying for Brenham Park. So we anticipate that we will go through these types of cycles where we would identify large projects or larger items that could be funded from CACs and then use them on I won't say a random, but a more strategic basis over time. We're not necessarily looking to have a stable inflow outflow year after year. We're thinking more save some up and then spend some money on a larger ticket item.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just want to clarify on page 50 of our report, land reserve. We tend to use that term, or at least I do, a little bit more flexibly, where it sometimes includes the value of land when we're speaking. But I take it in this context, this is strictly cash in the bank and does not include our projected land values. Is that accurate?
Through the chair. Yes, that is. You'll note that it's showing a land sale taking place next year. That will be because currently we have sufficient dollars in the reserve to fund those projects that are in the plan that we're spending in 22 and into 23. But we recognize that with the other projects that we have identified in that plan, so Brenham Park, Public Works, Second Fire Hall, we're going to need to replenish the land reserve. So we are looking at the potential of needing to sell some land in the near future. That $10 million reflects a parcel or a portion thereof. It does not reflect the total value of our land inventory. Our land inventory is probably closer to $40 million in total.
Thank you. Any further questions at this juncture before we move on? Okay, back to you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, we'll continue on. We're going to speak about utilities. on we go. Here we go. Utilities we're in a pretty good spot. This is one of those happy news stories for people. We're not looking at any, we're not looking at any rate changes in 2023 for water or wastewater. In both of those areas, our reserves are in pretty good shape, and the reserve contributions are consistent with what we are anticipating is going to come out of our longer term asset management modeling. That the models that we've seen so far, they're consistent with those numbers. We recognize that as we add assets, those numbers will change. That may require additional rate increases in the future, but currently we're in a pretty good space. In both of these utilities, we're looking at major projects that are DCC funded. And in both instances, we don't have sufficient DCCs in our DCC bucket to fund the total cost that will be required from DCCs. So the health of those reserves allows us to backstop our DCC amounts and still move forward with those two projects. And these are very significant projects. There's a water reservoir in water, obviously, sorry, that seems obvious now, and an upgrade to the wastewater treatment plant. In both of those instances, those are being driven by growth, and that's why they're being funded by developer cost charges. But the problem that we're seeing is that this is historic growth more so than future growth. So we haven't accumulated a large enough bucket of DCCs to actually pay for the full cost of those projects. But the projects need to move forward now because we've experienced such rapid growth in the community that we can no longer wait. So that's a good news story because we have sufficient funding in both the water and wastewater reserve to backstop our DCCs and allow us to move forward with those projects.
Can I just ask? I'd like to ask a question just on this slide while we're here. The gap in the DCC availability on a project that is eligible for being entirely funded by DCC will be that the gap is borrowed from the water reserve, and the DCCs, as they do come in future, will replenish that reserve. Is that correct? I just want to make sure that
that is the intent.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So if we, for example, borrowed $2.5 million to fund the water reservoir, then over time, we would expect to use the DCCs that we received in the future to repay that.
Thank you for that clarity.
In solid waste, the summary looks like this. In 2023, we will yet again have a 5% rate increase. And that will occur both in collection, which is residential, and in the landfill rates, or the rates charged at the landfill. This is year 3 of a 5-year program to increase our rates by a total of 25%. So in 21, 22, 23, again, 24, 25, we'll be looking at 5% rate increases on both sides. We hope we can get there before people at the landfill say that's too much money and they don't want to pay it. But you know, our staff are commenting that we could be looking at that in the future. So there is some risk with significant rate increases over time on the solid waste side. The reason that we need to do this is that we built a significant asset in the past, in the late 2010s. So the vertical wall, which was completed in 2020 and financed through debt. The debt requirements exceeded our total revenue. The debt requirements, while added to our operating costs for waste management or solid waste, put us in a situation where our expenses exceeded our revenues. And so we're using reserve draws to balance that off because they need to balance to zero at year end. So that is the reason that we're seeing this significant rate increase over time. Simply that we have to get the rates up so that we can pay the bills. The The other thing is that we are looking at, in the second half of this decade, we will, in all intent and purposes, fill the existing landfill and have to create a second landfill. That new landfill is also going to be debt financed. So by increasing the rates now, we are putting ourselves in a place where we will be able to fund the ensuing debt that we're going to have to take on for the new landfill, which will be upon us in all likelihood within the next decade. So ongoing 5% rate increase for solid waste. Would like to show that although it's a 5% rate increase, you'll note here that for the average residential customer, the total utility increase varies between around 1% and 2%, depending on what size of tote you have for the solid waste side. So if you have a large tote, you're going to pay approximately 2% more next year. And when we say 2% more, that's going to be $30. So the prices of the totes are going to go up for the average residential user, $10 for small, $20 for medium, $30 for large. And we will stop here for any questions related to the utility.
Council, questions? Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if actually this is the right spot for this, but I noticed in the landfill price increases, things like wood waste, both dirty wood and clean wood waste rates were increased, along with general waste prices. Would it be possible to freeze the cost of things like dirty wood and clean wood, things that we want to encourage both residents and contractors to separate, so that we increase the cost of general waste but maintain the cost of things that we want separated, to increase their motivation to keep separating waste?
Through the mayor, I'm going to ask if Shannon White is on the line, if she could address that.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Shannon White. I'm the Integrated Solid Waste Specialist, and through the mayor, I'd like to answer the question. So it's an excellent point about increasing diversion by using financial incentives. Unfortunately, we pay a lot, or we pay an increasing rate to responsibly manage both of those, the things like dirty wood and clean wood on the back end, right? So we accept it from the customers and then we properly dispose of it. So we do still have increased costs on that end. I don't know if we could freeze the price. We could look into it. However, what we do instead is we have what is called the ban surcharge on waste that has over 5% by weight or volume of recyclable material, which includes wood waste, that ends up in the landfill. And that you'll see in the tipping fee rates. It's also in there. It's called the ban surcharge. And if we catch someone that has tipped something that this ban surcharge is applied to, they get charged both the garbage rate and that rate. So it's a significant amount. It's close to $500 per metric ton now. So that's what we've done to kind of financially incentivize folks to keep those materials out of the landfill, while trying to keep the wood rates as low as possible and still be able to pay to manage them on the back end.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, Council, before we move on? Okay, back to you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you. Through the mayor, let's continue. So now we're going to talk about fun and exciting parts, the new stuff. So here we go. There were a list of questions that council asked at various points in time through our various seminars and workshops this summer and fall. And so we wanted to just highlight these because these are the ones that were specifically requested by council. So we have transfer funding, $50,000 from tennis court rehabilitation to pickleball to allow us to rehab the Eagle Wind pickleball area. We've added a paid parking implementation special operating project in 2023. We've added a vendor engagement special operating project in 2024. And we have done some research on SORCA's request for funding for the Valley Cliff Skills Park. And council had requested additional information be provided at this meeting. And so how I'm going to word that is this. We've looked at, staff have looked at the various commitments that the community has made and that council has made with respect to our community enhancement grants and the community enhancement grant program. That's the major program that we use to support SORCA and a number of other functions and facilities within the community. We've also looked at other areas within the community that council has provided direct funding to. And so our concern at this point is that to provide additional funding to SORCA at this stage without reviewing how that fits within the greater scheme of amounts of money that are provided by the district to various organizations, whether they be clubs, whether it be the Arts Council, whether it be the Squamish Foundation, so I think that's Sea to Sky Foundation, affordable housing, etc. There's a number of different groups that are all looking for funding, and we're not adverse to providing additional funding to this specific group, which supports recreational cycling. We just think that it would be advantageous for us to look at that more holistically in comparison to the other areas. So what we were proposing is that SORCA has asked for $16,000. If it is council's desire to provide the additional funds, and we're recommending that council use its contingency in 2022 to provide funding to SORCA, which we could pay to SORCA, and then they could, use it next year if they so desired. And that would provide them with a backstop to their requirements for next year, and would also provide the district staff with the opportunity to do a more thorough review of our community enhancement grant policy and where their draw fits in comparison to other organizations, and be able to come back to council with a more holistic response on what we thought would be a good combination of uses of funds. So our recommendation would be that if council wishes to provide additional funding for SORCA, that they use the council contingency. And with that, because the current methodology to fund SORCA is through the Community Enhancement Grant Program, that allow staff some time to review the Community Enhancement Grant process and see how that's all balanced up, and then bring some options back to council at that point. Further on that, should be noted that I believe all of our three major fund recipients, so SORCA, Squamish Arts Council, and Squamish Sea to Sky, all of their contracts that are being funded through community enhancement grants are up in 2024 or 2025. So we will be in the process of renegotiating those contracts in the near future. We think it will be appropriate for us to look at that in a more holistic manner in 2023. And then we come back to you with a proposal of how to deal with this and with the other questions around community enhancement grants. So I'm going to pause at this point rather than go on to the next slide in case there's additional questions from council.
Council, any questions? Councilor Pettingill?
Yeah, a couple things. One, can you remind me where our 2022 council contingency, what amount we have in that?
The amount is $50,000. The amount that's been allocated to date is zero.
Okay, thank you. And the other question, does the nature of our current agreement with Sorca, is it such that they would be able to choose to fund this from, within that existing envelope, or this would not fit under that contract?
Through the chair, the current contract does not cover this. It could not. It is specifically for trail maintenance and specifically excludes other facilities. So no, it couldn't.
Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. And just a clarification, a reminder, this is for work at this, a piece of land that is a district piece of land that we have leased to Sorca. Is that correct?
Yes. Sorry.
All right, I guess I could have answered that one too.
Councillor Hamilton, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. To help me put in perspective, can you, I noticed the tennis court and splash park was all put together with a $2.7 million price tag on it. Can you help me put in perspective, what's the price of the new tennis court? That'll help me put in perspective a $16,000 request from Sorca.
Through the chair, yes. The total project cost for the tennis courts, bear with me, I'm going to go with the numbers before this adjustment, was $900,000. Now it's going to be spent over 3 years. And that works out approximately to $400,000 for rehabilitation of the existing tennis courts and roughly $500,000 for the 2 new tennis courts. So, $250,000 each, let's say. Now, keeping in mind, please, that given recent price escalations, etc., that could be a little low, but that's our best guess at this point.
Go ahead, Councillor Hamilton.
Sorry, can I just follow up? Could somebody let me know? I'm sure this is information that exists. I just haven't dug into it. What is our current contribution with our current contract with Sorca? How much do we contribute to them annually?
Sorry, through the chair, 90,000 95,000 in 2022, 100,000 in 2023, and 105 in 2024 for trail maintenance.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just clarifying the contingency piece. So this would be a 2023 project potentially coming out of the 2022 council contingency?
That is correct. We wouldn't think it appropriate at this stage to encumber next year's contingency. If we wish to make a contribution, we could just effectively write a check to Sorca today, and we're pretty close to the end of the year. They could probably hold on to it for another month before they cash it, and it'll be 2023.
Okay, thank you. And then were we not do this, like say we just elected not to spend any contingency in 2022, that would roll into the general operating reserve?
That is correct.
Thank you. I have a question before we get to then Councillor Stoner. I think the title of this Sorca piece here should be adjusted, as they do also have some interest in and some responsibility around the skill park at Brendan Park. And that what we're discussing here is the dirt jumps and pump track in Valleycliff or behind the casino. So in future documentation, if any, I think it should the title should be adjusted to reflect that. And I appreciate staff's recommendation around that greater look, more fulsome look at the grant and aid process. And for years, I don't know how long exactly the municipality's been contributing, but Sorca's, it's been a challenge to find a program where they do fit. And they've sort of landed in this in this area as a bit of a workaround. So I do agree there's a fulsome look at that, at the grant and aid process, but I think even stepping back a little bit further, how do we, if it's appropriate to continue to fund SORCA, and I'd argue that it is, but that's a discussion for another day, what's the best mechanism to do that? And I want to make sure that's not lost in the discussion going forward, so that maybe we can figure out a different way to solve this challenge. And a little bit earlier, Councillor Hamilton asked a great question, looking for a comparison around using tennis courts back and forth. This ask here is for sort of ongoing maintenance of the facility, not necessarily the construction. And that facility was, just to add additional context, was volunteer built, and many municipalities are putting millions of dollars into things that result in something that's less than what we have here. Just to put that context in, and that is my assessment, not necessarily staff. So, after that commentary, there's a question in here somewhere, and the question will be: has staff put their mind to sort of that future funding overall of the organization, and have you, or did I assume I didn't highlight something that was new information? So I'm just curious if there's been any advancement in the thought of where they may fit, because the grant and aid process is a bit of a unconventional place to accomplish this through.
I guess the answer to that simply is no, we haven't got to that level of review, but that's probably the level to which we should be, both looking at those groups in relation to each other and in relation to where that funding, particularly from SORCA, is coming from, and whether or not the current location is the right one.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that we, before we get into debating the distribution of the funds in that particular bucket, that we've had that fulsome look and what should be coming from that space. So I'm comfortable that that's been highlighted at this point. I have Councillor Stoner and then Councillor Pettingill.
Thank you. Through the chair, when this came to us as a presentation by SORCA a month ago or so, it was mentioned that the lease was up for renewal in May of this past year. And I think that there was like a bit of a missed opportunity to incorporate this into the budget. So yes, I agree with Mayor Herford's point that this is unique in that it was volunteer driven and that there was no money required from the district in terms of capital investment, but it's on district land. And my sense is that we haven't fully figured out how to incorporate the operational costs of that into our budget. And so that's why we're here in this kind of tough position at the last kind of 11th hour of our budget. So I'm wondering if staff have given any more thought to what this means in terms of the renewal of that lease and how we incorporate this into is it our responsibility to incorporate this into operating costs? Have we had that discussion with SORCA, or is this really just a one-off year and we're going to have those conversations next year?
Mr. Buxton and I are, through the chair, Mayor Herford. I will do my best to answer your question. I think Mr. Buxton and I are both looking to avoid this question, but I can't speak to the lease specifically. I think that's more of a real estate thing. And so I'm not going to go down that path because I'm certainly not a real estate expert. It's not, I mean, the greater scheme of things, this is not a huge dollar amount. I think currently what we're trying to do is figure out where will we put it for now, and then try to get a better idea where this should fit in a long-term basis. If it is something that we should be funding, and perhaps funding through our parks organization, well, that's part of why we're asking, give us some time to do some research, and then we'll figure out what we think is more appropriate. Again, I can't address the lease component because I just don't know. So, Mr. Buxton, do you have anything to add to that? No.
So just on that, and perhaps these are more thoughts, comments than questions, but I agree it's not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of things, but I do think that there's an equity piece in the process here, and I brought this up when Sorka was present as well. This is one of multiple organizations that are asking for money. A few months before them, we had the skateboard folks in, and so I do think that there is a piece here around it can balloon really quickly if we start to respond to last minute requests. So I guess my question in that is that there's two components to the ask that Sorka has. One is kind of a 10,000 annual larger upgrade to the facility, and then one is the $500 monthly minor repairs and maintenance. I think both are important, but I wonder if just for like this first year, if we consider half of that request, so like the monthly $500 repairs and provide them $6,000 to make sure that it's still a functioning facility. But before we put all the money on the table, we provide staff some time to have those conversations. I'm just curious if anybody has any thoughts on that process or approach.
Through the chair, that's certainly possible. I don't think we had put our minds to dividing up the request. I think we'd just seen it as one. And to be honest, with the amounts proposed as well, for us it wasn't worth passing it in that way. But yes, council could choose that option if they chose.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, just along the similar line of thinking or questioning, I vaguely recall that there was a sort of last minute ask from Sorka last year as well. And just sort of recognizing there are lots of organizations, volunteer, providing important service who are all sort of scrambling and everyone's, things fall through the cracks in those circumstances. But am I correct in thinking that there's a similar scenario last year, or is this sort of an unusual, and this is the first time we've seen this in a while?
Through the mayor, if I may, this is a bit of a tough question to answer, so I'll do my best. I think in 2021 for the 2022 budget, Sorka was a little late, and so it was a last minute request. Okay. And my understanding is that we kind of gave them the information that here's what our budget cycle looks like. So try to fit your request in at a more appropriate time. So they looked at that budget cycle, and that was the budget cycle for 2021. That's a normal year. 2022 is an election year, so the budget cycle was compressed. So they were late in 22, but that's because the budget cycle was compressed. And I don't think that they were aware of the compression. So I think that they had positive intent to be there at the earlier stage as we had requested for the 2023 ask. Is just with it being an election year, the cycle was compressed.
Councillor Greenlaw.
You mentioned that none of the rest of the contingency fund had been allocated to any other projects, but are there any projects kind of in mind that could use that money?
If I could, just to clarify that, maybe could you start with the intent of council contingency and any guardrails or policy surrounding it, just the intent of the fund before we get into I think that might be a good starting point for this conversation.
Thank you for that question through the mayor. The intent of the contingency is just to really give council a buffer for when items that are unanticipated come to council. So it's very much just there in terms of if something comes up that's not in our budget cycle and that council would like to fund.
And is there any incentive to use that fund every year? Like, sometimes in the business world, if you don't use your entire budget, then you're not allocated that much money the next year. You know what I mean? Like in terms of grants and federal, provincial.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. No, there isn't. We have that budget consistent year over year.
Thank you. Any other questions on this topic or anything on the screen? Councillor French.
A process question, Mayor. If council was leaning towards directing staff to allocate, say, that the 16,000 that's being requested and coming out of contingency, would staff need a motion from council for that today?
We would need a motion to spend funds, yes, but whether today is the only opportunity to do that, maybe that's the question that I'll modify your question slightly to Ms. Boxford, if that's okay with you.
Thank you, through the mayor. Certainly today would be a great time to make that decision. However, we do have some time in the year because staff is recommending utilizing the 2022 contingency, not the 2023.
Thank you for that. And I also think that as we enter into the sort of the public comment period around budgeting, I think it'd be appropriate to have an understanding of what we're going to do with this particular ask as we head into this afternoon's session, which happens next, and of course our public engagement on the 29th. So it'd be a good time to discuss that or put a motion forward if you're interested in doing so. Councillor Stoner.
I'll make a motion that council provide $10,000 to SORCA from council contingency for the dirt jump. What were we calling it in Bike Skills Park?
Yeah,
Valley.
Is that what it's officially
Bike
called?
Skills Park.
Thank you.
And if it's seconded, I'll speak to it.
Councillor French seconds. Go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, recognizing that this isn't the full amount that SORCA has asked for, I think if this is not favorable to them for very clear reasons, we'll hear from them. But I do think that this is a fair kind of happy medium to move forward with. I think it gives them the $10,000, which I will quote from their email, says will ensure jump shape, takeoffs, landings, transitions, fall zone, speed, and path circulation all remain safe for the long term, which I think is the critical part here, is I don't want anybody getting hurt in the Bike Skills Park. But it also gives our staff some time to better figure out, along with the lease agreement, how we fit these operating costs into our budget in a more fulsome and fair manner relative to the other asks that we have coming forward. And so I'm really cognizant, both with this ask as well as more broadly as we look to use our CACs, and we have different and multiple demands on our budget, how we fairly spread that across multiple users. SORCA is a very well organized organization of very dedicated volunteers, and they do amazing work for our community, and they really amplify the amount that we put towards that organization time and time again. And I want to support that work. But there are other organizations that aren't quite that sophisticated yet that also deserve council time and attention. And so that's why I'm not going with the full 16,000 at this point. I think I want to make sure that it is safe and that we come up with a more robust long-term solution. And I think that this will get us there for the short term.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Councillor French, followed by Councillor Anderson.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm supporting the motion, and I think some of the words we've heard from Councillor Stoner that are kind of outside the motion that talk about long-term planning around how we allocate funds in this way. We just need to look into the gallery to see there's a representative of the boating community that's very interested in having us dedicate funds in the year ahead to figuring out our boat launch situation. So it's an important detail that we do need to figure out how to make sure we're equitable in funding groups in our community that aren't as aggressive and organized as SORCA. So speaking in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson, followed by Pettingill.
Thank you. I will be supporting the motion, but I'd like to express a concern somewhat along the same lines or in the same spirit of what we heard from Councillor French. Staff have outlined that they do have a concern that they do see it as advantageous to be taking a more holistic look, in principle, if you like. Councillor French has referred to another community desire, another community project. Councillor Greenlaw and I, who both happen to be residents of Hospital Hill, recently visited a pedestrian trail safety issue, a long-standing one on the Valley Cliff Trail, with SORCA and Trail Society representatives at their request. People are getting hurt on this district property, a pedestrian trail, a safe route to school, or should be a safe route to school, that needs some attention. And so I'd just like to echo the concern of staff and some of my colleagues that we do make sure that we take a holistic look at our needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill.
Yeah, thanks. I will support this. I think the thing that put me over the line is the fact that it is this sort of change due to the election that adjusted the budget cycle and made it more challenging for this to come in on time. I think, though, I wouldn't see this as an encouragement for everyone to come to us and get us to use up the contingency by the end of the year. For me, I did ask earlier, any remainder goes into the general reserve, which is a critical reserve, and I don't want to shortchange that. And then just a bit of self-reflection. This is, it's at $10,000 now, a max of $16,000 relative to the total amount of money and projects and everything we have to consider. This is very small, but we've spent a significant amount of council time on it, which just reminds me of the importance of the community enhancement grant process, which we revamped and tried to make much more efficient. And I acknowledge I probably asked the most questions, so I'm probably the most at fault here, but we're kind of circumventing our own process that we developed to try and make this more efficient. So I guess it's maybe a good reminder to me to try and stick to those processes, which we have worked hard on. But again, I will support this for now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll be supporting the motion. I will be following up with a motion around how we address the operations of this facility going forward to next budget, but I'll save that to after the vote on this particular piece. So seeing no further comments, any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. I'd like to make a motion that we refer the long-term operations and maintenance of the Valley Cliff Skills Park to budget 2023 for consideration. Seconded by Councillor Stoner. I think I'll speak to this briefly. I think we've spent a lot of time here, but I think sort of at the start of the process of the construction of this facility and the agreements leading into that, the operations and maintenance were just left aside, and that was a miss at that time. And I think it's appropriate to consider correcting that in some way. And I'll look forward to those discussions in budget 2020 by the time we get to our next budget, and hope we can come to a good space on this. And the motion we just passed, I think, is a good stopgap effort to get us there. And that's how I was viewing that in my mind. Anyone else on this particular topic? Councillor Stoner?
Sorry, just to clarify, your motion was for budget 2024, correct?
2024. Yeah, sorry, that we discussed in 2023, but yes, in budget 2024. Thank you. And that's what you seconded, yes? Okay, yeah, just to make sure that doesn't change. All right, sorry for that there. Interesting time travel. Anyone else on this particular piece? Okay, with that, any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Go ahead.
Before we change slides, sorry, Mr. Russell. But don't worry, this question will likely be directed to Mr. Buxton, so you're off the hot seat. Mr. Buxton, and sorry if I missed this, I was a bit late to the meeting, but the paid parking implementation, can you just elaborate on what that will get us in 2023 and how quickly we might be able to actually, what does that project look like for 2023?
The plan with the 70,000 is split roughly half in that project is split sort of rough in terms of the funding, half being for a plan to actually get, how do you get from A to B? How do you actually start to implement a paid parking program? Because it has, particularly in the downtown area, which is our focus, it has some knock-on effects with respect to the adjacent areas and displacement. So we have to plan for that. The second is a communications plan about how we roll this out to the community, because invariably it's never quite that smooth doing this. So 2 parts: plan, communication.
Okay, that's helpful. And just to follow up on that, I think one of the things that we had chatted about when we talked about putting this in the budget was actually to not necessarily focus on downtown first for paid parking. It was to focus on other areas that are primarily tourist oriented. So Darrell Bay, perhaps the Smoke Bluffs parking lot, and looking at the oceanfront lands, depending on when those come online. So I'm just curious if that is in alignment with what is being proposed here, or if that changes the scope of what we're thinking.
That's a change in scope. I mean, it's not undoable if that's council's wish to look at paid parking outside of the downtown, but the parking strategy in terms of a paid parking program focused on that area, and that's been our plan for the last few years, is to start there. Doesn't mean we stop there, but we start there. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility to include places like Darrell Bay, the Adventure Center, Smoke Bluffs. The Sparkworth Park or the oceanfront is sort of, for me, is downtown. It wouldn't make any sense to not include that. So I don't see that being an impossible change in scope. It is a change in scope, but I don't see it being impossible.
Okay, I'll just make my comments and maybe my council colleagues can provide theirs. That was my intent when we had talked about this, was not to just focus on the downtown core. I know that's where the parking utilization study has focused for this given year, but generally speaking, I think to make a paid parking program more palatable over time, implementation, I think, needs to focus more broadly than just on the downtown core, and really focusing on those areas that we know are perhaps tourist first areas like Darrell Bay. We also know there's other users that are looking at Darrell Bay more broadly. So I think putting that in sooner rather than later will make good sense. But in terms of, yeah, I just want to make sure that that can be accommodated in the given project scope.
If that's the wish of council, I'm not sure how you want to establish that, but if that's the wish of council, I don't think it's a huge scope change to do that. So.
Thank you, Councillor Pettingill. On this topic. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So my understanding was similar to Councillor Stoner's. So I guess my question to staff through the mayor is, we've heard that this is some change in scope, but not unreasonable. Do we have a sense, or I guess, what is the best way? Is it would staff like to come back with, here is the change in amount, or here's what we would need to do what council is asking, or what's the best way forward here?
Probably going to get my knuckles wrapped for this one, but Miss Glenday isn't here to do that, so I'm going to do it anyways. To be honest, if council wanted to pass a motion to the effect that the scope be expanded to include visitor associated parking, that is crystal clear to me. And I say, I don't think that it substantially affects the project. That expands the scope for me in very clear terms. So.
On the same line, I don't want to be, I'm a little weary of being prescriptive on where it's at this particular meeting where pay parking is to be implemented first, but I do think it's worth considering the impacts into those tourism areas, and as we contemplate the pay parking structure. So I like the suggested wording from Mr. Buxton. I think that sort of could potentially put us in a position where we could understand those knock-on effects and the kinds of things I'd like to understand more are, if we had pay parking downtown, would we see an increase in parking at the Adventure Center as a mode shift spot for people to walk or ride their bike from there into the downtown core? And should we want to encourage that? Do we want to add pay? Like, they're all sort of interconnected. So I'd like to understand that more. And I think whatever language around whatever motion should sort of capture that, so that we can make that more informed decision around the actual implementation at a future date. So I'm feeling a motion coming, but I wanted to make sure that I got that perspective out there in advance of. So I see Councillor Stoner's hand.
I'll move that the paid parking implementation special operating project description be expanded to include the following: that the scope be expanded to include visitor primary areas.
Thank you. Councillor French seconds. Would you like to speak to it, or are you?
Nothing further. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor French?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I'm happy to hear from staff that this apparently is a relatively pain-free addition to the scope of this project, because I too was left with the impression that that's where we were at, was a target to extract revenue from visitors more so than residents.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, sorry. I did just want to make note, both for the public and new council members, that one of the pieces of the conversation around this is we have a really ambitious expansion for transit over time that's going to cost us a lot of money. And I think one of the main ways that we might be able to pay for that going forward is if we have some form of paid parking. And so that's part of my motivation to move this forward sooner rather than later, is that I think it's one of the alternative forms of revenue that we can look at to pay for something like expansion in transit.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'll just, I like this direction. And I think taking the most holistic approach we can is appropriate. And I also think that the pay parking does stand a chance of providing a lever that we can implement quickly to manage the demands. And we're hearing we do hear from our community that they are having challenges with parking downtown, and this stands to be a way that we can positively impact that in the short term with what stands to be a minimal investment that may lead to some revenue, which we're in need of. So I'll be supporting the motion. With that, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And from my last comments, I'll just ask where the revenue portion or potential revenue portion around parking, at what point do we start accounting for that? I mean, we'd be implementing, I'm thinking cost benefit analysis, and if it could be a profit center in future, how do things like that get incorporated? I get that it's too early now, but if it costs $100,000 to implement, but that's recovered in the first year in fees, like how do those types of things get accounted for, just sort of to start our thought process on this or similar topics?
Through the mayor, we're very fortunate to have invested in a very sophisticated new financial system, which will allow us to do those types of things. So we would, through discussions within staff and obviously as directed by council, we would create the necessary structure within our accounting system to allow us to track both the costs and the revenue streams associated with them and provide comparisons of the two if requested by council.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much. And now we're going to jump to the public portion of the one second. Councillor Anderson, before we conclude here, go ahead.
Yes, excuse me, Mayor Herford. I apologize. I should have asked a question regarding a special operating project earlier in the session. I was just a little bit unclear of our itinerary. Very good, then. Thank you. This is a question concerning the item environmental riparian restoration project. We, over the past several years, have received letters from adjacent residents and various organizations concerning some of these waterways, Wilson Crescent Slough, Carson Place Slough, the Upper Blind Channel as well, concerning their condition, the neglect, the block culverts and this sort of thing. Are these waterways could be considered part of the proposed scope of this project? What is the geographic scope at the present time?
Thank you. Through the chair. At present, the scope was anticipated to be in the channels that are sort of typically known as the Mamcram Reunion channels, sort of north of the tidal portion of the Blind Channel, because that's identified as prime fish habitat and where we can likely affect the most impact for our dollar. Does it mean we can't go somewhere else? No, I don't believe so. I think if that doesn't turn out to be achievable with the money proposed, then could we go somewhere else? Yes. I say the scope of the project will be dictated by the budget. We'll go as far as the budget will allow. At present, we're simply targeting where we think is the highest quality fish habitat that we can work with.
Thank you. Wearing a Squamish greenkeeper's hat, walking that slough for quite frequently, it is valuable fish habitat in the Wilson Crescent, Carson Place Slough, and we haven't seen pinks there for about 10 years due to the conditions of the stream. So I'd just like to pass on that I think that there is valuable habitat other than to the north of the then in the Mamcram Reunion channels to the north of the Adventure Center. It isn't clear to me from the project description what exactly the goals are. There's reference to enhance natural drainage assets. We did cover the stormwater management plan completed for this area a couple of months ago, but there was no project discussed during that session. In fact, it was clarified that a potential project in the Wilson Crescent Slough and the Carson Place Slough would not be discouraged or affected by that plan. So I'm not clear about the goals. We're talking about drainage assets or fish or recreation or aesthetics or all of the above. What are the specific goals of this project?
Through the chair, enhancement of riparian habitat. It is not focused on recreation. It is essentially better fish habitat. That's the purpose of that reserve.
Thank you. Then I come back to the geographic scope. If it is fish habitat, then the Upper Mamcram Blind Channel and the other sloughs to the west do have very well identified fish habitat concerns. They've been identified for a long while by professionals and in district consultant reports. I'll leave my comments and questions at that then. I would also just pass on that we have a substantial number of residents along these waterways, over 700 housing units, 1 hostel, 2 schools, a few institutional buildings, including the Adventure Center. There's a lot of stakeholders in the health of these waterways. I'll leave that as my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Just out of that conversation, I had a question around how, given that there are multiple opportunities for habitat improvement across the district, how did staff prioritize this particular spend?
Prioritize, sorry, through the chair, prioritize the spend.
Or the target of the spend. So just how, if the budget's approved and it includes this amount, and we've heard that there's opportunities elsewhere, and I'm sure your staff is aware of where the challenges and opportunities are. What criteria was used to select this particular focus of these?
That was a brief discussion with the staff in the environmental department. Just in terms of follow-up, we fully intend on working with a non-profit such as Streamkeepers, might be Streamkeepers, might be another agency, to identify where can we actually get our best value for money We're targeting that as the starting point. If one of those organizations comes and says, I've got the most fantastic project and it can work over here, we as far as I'm concerned, the target is enhanced fish habitat. If that project can be best done elsewhere, I would do it elsewhere.
Okay, thank you. So there's nothing in the description or the budget process that ties us into that. There's still opportunity if another higher return area is highlighted. That's what I've heard here today. Is that correct?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct. That's why it's left as the title is quite generic. Yes, I have identified a starting option in the description, but it doesn't say Mamquam Reunion Channels Environmental Restoration Project. It's a generic location agnostic project right now.
Thank you. That's helpful. And with that, we're gonna change gears now to the online and public participation question and answer opportunity. We do have some folks joining us on WebEx, but I'm going to pass it over to Ms. Arthurs to introduce the how that was going to work.
Thank you, Mayor Herford. Robin Arthurs, General Manager, Corporate Services, Acting CAO this week. We do have a number of people that we see are streaming the meeting right now. And because they're on our stream versus WebEx, they're unable to come on and participate. So if there's anybody online watching through the streaming who wants to participate, please go to the district's homepage, squamish.ca, and there is a yellow quick link that says participate in a public meeting. And if you click that, it'll tell you how to get onto this meeting today. So if you have questions or you want to engage council in our budget and what you've heard so far, please come online on WebEx.
Thank you. And then the folks that are, as we're getting ready to take questions, are there instructions in particular for the folks on WebEx, or is that?
There's no longer any external people on WebEx.
Okay, so as we wait for that, maybe we can open up to the gallery. Is there anyone in the gallery that has a question before we hear from as we hope folks migrate over from the stream to the to WebEx? Yep, go ahead. You can, if you step up to the podium and we need the name. So just state your name and organization and if any, and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you very much. My name is Trevor Chelswick, and I have lots of hats in town. I know most of you. I'd like to start off with a congratulations to Mayor and Council for your service to our community. Squamish is an oceanfront community without a plan for a boat launch. This is a request to amend the DOS budget for 2023. It is made on behalf of the 371 members of the Squamish Needs a Boat Launch Facebook group and the larger community that this group represents. There's a lot happening in the Squamish oceanfront, and there's so many opportunities for marine access that many may be lost if they're not pursued vigorously in a constructive and timely way. The proposed DOS budget has only one line item in related to marine, and that is a marine impact study for $40,000 in 2024. There's nothing in there that I saw for 2023, and that one is a financial analysis, so not really relevant to access. Senior District DOS Planner Sarah McJanet has done an excellent job liaising with the community about marine access, considering the limited resources at her disposal. The intention of this proposed budget amendment is to provide district staff additional resources in 2023 to pursue conversations and actions that will improve marine access in Squamish, for all of Squamish, all types of marine access. We suggest the DOS budget for 2023 include $20,000 to pursue opportunities for community access the Squamish oceanfront in general in 2023. This includes, and is not limited to, preliminary design and proof of concept for a boat launch at Darrell Bay and possible short-term enhancements at the current boat launch. The district resources can be applied. It can be amplified if used to coordinate the many community volunteers that are happy to volunteer their energy and expertise to the goal of marine access for Squamish. Respectfully submitted, Trevor Chelswick. I'd also add an invitation a lot of you have taken out on boat ride, zero tide boat ride, which was quite illuminating, I thought, somewhat entertaining too. And I'd like to extend that invitation again to everyone for the spring when it's a little nicer. And or if there's any idea, anything you'd like to, could use a captain in a boat, you know, some special purpose that's related to our ocean front, then I'm game. So thank you. Do I stand? Do I go?
Thank you very much. I think the letter that you, or the letter that you've read out, could you email that to us as well? And it can be included.
I posted it on the.
Oh, it's already in the budget.
I posted it to just this morning.
Okay.
There's like 4 comments on the budget, and I added that one officially.
Thank you. I forgot in my preamble to say that all the feedback we capture here tonight will be included with the feedback from the upcoming event on the 29th, and which I hope you can attend, and then we'll be correlated, and we'll sort of the intent is to address kind of all of them as a whole in our subsequent meetings from then. Your submission does trigger a question for me, which is perhaps where does the Marine Action Strategy and funding of that sort of ongoing work, where is that reflected in the current budget? Because I know that there's ongoing processes there, and I'm just trying to understand if if maybe we've covered this off in an area that is less that's less obvious than a distinct line item associated with directly that task. Is that something that staff could speak to it at this point, or?
Through the mayor, Mr. Russell's just having a look at the details there, and we'll bring response in.
Okay. Yep. No, that's a fair. Oh, okay.
To the Marine Action, sorry, did I read this right? Marine Impact Study is funded from tax.
Oh, thank you. My question was continued work on the Marine Action Strategy, say through Ms. McJanet or otherwise, sits in some work plans, I'm sure. So I'm just curious if this particular work towards this particular goal is happening, but sits somewhere else rather than a specific line item associated with that specific outcome. For me, it falls under Marine Action Strategy, which has a bunch of stuff in there around that continuing to work towards having increased access. And so I'm just curious if a portion of this ask is covered, or if this is the ask that needs to happen to achieve the goal that Mr. Cheswick's here to pursue. And if we can't I understand that might not be something we can address, and Ms. McJanet's on the line, but so this could be a question we can have answered at a future date if you can't get there now. I'm just. Okay, Mr. Vilniskis, would you like to? Okay.
Sure. Thank you. And I'd like to first thank Trevor for taking some of the staff and council on a boat launch tour earlier this year. When it comes to the boat launch, we are still studying this issue. So the marine access study is still ongoing. So we're not ready to propose a budget. Essentially, we need to examine the options and price them out, and there might need be more requests for funding to analyze this issue. But even if we had money at this point in the budget, we're just not there yet with marine access study to essentially spend it or put staff resources in. So that is why there's no funding proposed in the 23 budget.
Thank you. And just to be clear, that no funding in the budget doesn't mean that we're not pursuing that goal as swiftly as we can figure out to. Is that that's what I'm hearing? I just want to make sure that the lack of a budget specific line item didn't mean that the work wasn't ongoing in some way.
That's correct. We've had money allocated for this item this year, which is what we're working on.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoner?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm one of the folks who took you up on your offer to go do a tour, and I'm grateful that you're as good as a mariner as you are, because we did have a few technical issues. There is not much water there to actually get a boat through when it's below low tide. I think that's a dredging issue, though, more than a marine access issue. But I digress. My comments were, I think, just to build on what Mr. Balanesca said, that I think there's a principle that we use in budgeting and finance, that we don't tax for something that we can't actually implement in the coming year. And I think this is the challenge with the topic that we've gone around a few times, is that there isn't a clear solution for us to actually implement at this point. And so I don't think that doesn't mean that because there's no money in the budget, we're not working on it. I think there's a commitment from a number of us. I've heard from my council colleagues that this is an issue that we keep top of mind. There just isn't an easy solution at this point. And so until there is a clear solution to put money behind in a budget line item, like, oh, this is where it's going to go, and then we can start doing design, it's really hard for me to want to advocate to put $20,000 of taxation money in the budget when I know that money can't get spent. And so we're taxing for something that we can't spend for. So that is the tension that I am sitting in right now with the request. But I want you to know that it's not for lack of interest in the topic or notable importance. It's just that we don't have a clear path forward at this point. And so I'd rather staff focus on continuing to work with you and the volunteer organization to find that path so that we can put money towards it.
Thank you, Councillor Stoner. Any other? Councillor Anderson.
If I may, I'd like to ask Mr. Vilaniskis a question regarding the ongoing marine access strategy. I believe last year we allocated some funds toward a consultant study in addition to the outreach and survey program. Is there a technical report or consultant's report that might be forthcoming for council in the near term, specifically regarding access?
Yes, so for you, Mayor, we do have a consultant working on this item, and that is a marine navigation type of consulting work. It will come to council once we're finished. I am not at this point sure of the exact date when this will be coming back, but the marine access study will be coming to council.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to go back to thank you, Mr. Cheswick. I think you're doing a great job advocating for your cause, and appreciate that. And I did enjoy the boat tour as well, and I like a little bit of adventure in my day, so it was it was that as well. We do have, I believe, Mr. Navi's online, or I'll pass it over to Tori to take us through.
Yes, we do have a member of the public online. So just a reminder, if you are interested in asking a question, it's *3 on your phone, or you can press the little hand icon at below the participant panel. But right now we have no hands raised.
Okay, so if you're participating online and you'd like to ask a question, please raise your electronic hand. And while we wait for that to happen, we'll see if there's any other questions around the council table or in the gallery to move us forward. Seeing none. Do we have folks in WebEx, just not with hands raised? Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Maybe I'll do well, I'm going to do a last call here shortly for that as they ponder whether they'd like to raise their hands or figure out how to do so. But we've got Councillor Pettingill. Go ahead with the question.
Yeah, just sort of pick up from the last topic since we are waiting for the public to chime in. Right above the marine impact study, there's also the tourism master plan. And I think the question of boat launches come up in a tourism context as well. I'm just wondering if staff can clarify, is something like a boat launch, can we expect consideration of this in both of these plans, or is it really this is part of the marine impact study for next steps?
I'm going to ask if Kate Mulligan can address that. possible.
Thank you, through the chair. So we haven't scoped the tourism master plan yet. However, sorry, can everybody hear me? Okay, sorry. We haven't scoped the tourism master plan yet, but it would be contemplated that marine experience as terrestrial experiences would be contemplated and the infrastructure that is required to support a sustainable tourism economy. However, I don't think there would be necessarily specific planning around a boat launch.
Thank you. I'll go back to online. Do we have any raised hands there online? Okay, so that's going to conclude the public portion of this, and I'm just going to circle back to we had a motion, a recommended motion from staff at the onset of this, so that the District of Squamish proceed with the legislated public meeting November 29th, 2022 on the 2023 to 2027 financial plan as presented in this report. And moved by Councillor French, or was there a clarifying question before if it's okay? Okay, so we're going to go to Councillor Stone with the question before we accept the movement of the motion.
Thank you, and sorry for the late question, but I remember that I also had a question about one other special project, which was the Parks and Rec Master Plan. Can I ask that now?
Please do.
I'm just wondering if staff can speak to the rationale for including this. It's not in the 2023 budget, it's for 2024. But we did have some discussion around it with previous council when this came up, and the sense being that there's actually a lot of master plans existing in place for our recreation facilities. And so I'm just curious why staff are putting this in the budget for 2024.
Thank you. And do we have appropriate staff member to answer this, Mr. LePage or Mr. Vilniscus? I saw two hands there, so maybe you guys, who wants to go first? Okay, Mr. Vilniscus.
You want me to take
start?
You can go ahead. I'll add to your comments.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, the trails and parks or the Rec and Parks Master Plan is 10 years old now, and it was done in a time that was quite different in terms of growth projections in Squamish. We are not proposing to revisit any of the master planning that we've done for the Brennan Park facility. The focus of this proposed project is to look at our parks needs, our park standards and trail standards, and also to examine the satellite facilities and whether there is a need for any. So this is becoming something that's needed in places like the oceanfront. For instance, we have in the zoning bylaw, we have an area that's designated for civic use. And so one of the questions that came up is, do we, as we negotiate with developer on that on a specific property, what are the district needs when it comes to recreation in these satellite locations? And so that's why that is something that the previous plan didn't answer. And that is expected to be the focus of this review, so that making sure that as these bigger developments take place, if we do need any recreational facilities or services to be provided in these locations, that we know exactly what our needs are. And so that would take any of the master planning work that we've already done for Brennan Park and likely incorporate it into this update.
Thank you. Mr. LePage, did you have anything to add?
Through the chair, nothing to add. I just couldn't see if someone was available to answer. So nothing to add. I think this was a really complete answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pettingill.
So as part of this, would we be contemplating our arts, culture, and heritage plan and those facility needs, or are we still keeping those as distinct from possible satellite recreation, sort of other recreation?
I think we would, for arts and culture facilities, we would, I think, this could absolutely be part of the scope. We're spending some time between now and when we have budget for it, essentially in 2024, in determining what the scope should be.
Do you have a follow-up? Okay, go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you, and appreciate the additional detail. And I did notice in this report to council that there will be a chance for council to provide some input on the scoping in 2023, and this is in the 5-year financial plan for 2024. So I think we can have more fulsome debate about it in next year's budget cycle. But I am still hesitant about it, just to put that out there early. So I will be curious to dig in more fulsomely during that scoping conversation, just knowing how many pressures there are on our 5-year financial plan, that I don't want to set us up for something that we're not going to actually be able to deliver on. We're already having a hard time delivering on Brennan Park. And so there's a balance that needs to be struck here around planning for the future and then actually being able to implement those plans, and not just letting folks down by having them engage in the process and then it taking us 5 to 10 years to actually implement. So that's where my hesitation comes from. I do appreciate that there are some clear opportunities there, Mr. Belanauskas, with some of the forthcoming developments, and that makes more sense to me. So I'm looking forward to the discussion in the new year.
Thank you. And before we entertain the motion, I just want to ask, we did make a few minor changes and through this afternoon. Was there anything, does staff feel that the recommended motion still reflects what's needed here?
Through the mayor, yes, it does.
Thank you. So I'll go back to Councillor French. Would you still like to move the staff recommendation?
I'll move it and speak to it.
Okay. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Stoner. Go ahead, Councillor French.
Thanks, Mayor. And speaking to this motion, because I think the place where we're at is very unique. And as someone who has covered a lot of District of Squamish budget processes, we have never had a budget like this that takes into account pandemic impacts, the unprecedented growth that we've seen over the last few years, the fact that we're looking at significant increases in our resourcing to the fire department, to our police department, and capital projects in the form of buildings that are super important. So I'm hoping that we'll have a good turnout and the public will engage with us on the 29th to provide feedback on this set of budget numbers.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak to this particular motion? I'll just add some thoughts. I'm excited about the work that's gone into this this budget, and not just in our next budget year, but that seeing that longer term approach sort of filtering into our budgeting process. And I really look forward to discussing that more fulsomely with the community at the event on the 29th. So with that, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time here. And next up, can I have a motion to close, please? Councillor Stoner, Councillor Anderson, any opposed? Motion carries. We're going to be in recess to tear down the room, and then we'll reconvene in the closed.
Do we have time?
With just, yes, who's the group? Councillors. Yes. Yeah. So council, or somewhere along the way here, let's do it right before we restart and closed, we'll do a group photo all together. But